Good evening. My name's David Kesterson, and tonight we'll be looking at Mark chapter 10, verses 42 through 45. But before we get started on that, to put it in context, we actually need to go back. This section actually starts in about verse 35, but I'm going to go back just a little bit farther. Jesus has just told the disciples that he's going to Jerusalem, and that while there he will die, and that on the third day he will be raised again. So this brings us into verse 35, which is where James and John, after hearing that they're going to Jerusalem, and they come to Jesus, James and John, and they ask him if they might be able to rule with him, one on his left hand and one on his right hand. And Jesus' reply to them is one that he's telling them that I don't think you're meaning what you're asking. You are asking to rule with me, but I don't know that you know what that means. He goes on to tell them that, to ask them if they would be able to drink from the cup that he's going to drink to, if they'll be able to be baptized in what he's going to be baptized into. And they tell him, yes, we can do that. But they are not understanding where he's going with this, or what he's talking about. He's actually talking about suffering and what's going to be happening to him. But he does tell them that they will partake in this. They will partake in some of the suffering that Jesus himself went through. They will go through similar suffering. So at this point, the rest of the disciples, the other 10, find out that James and John have asked this. Now they are very upset with them. They're thinking, wow, how could you guys do this? The sons of thunder have now decided that they want to rule, maybe even over the other 10 disciples. And so Jesus takes this time to explain to them that James and John had a very wrong idea of what leadership was going to be like for the Christian, as well as the other 10 disciples, I believe. So that gets us up to speed here. And verse 42, I'm going to go ahead and read Mark chapter 10, verse 42 through 45. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Okay, so, wow, through this, this must have just blown the disciples' mind for them to think about Jesus coming to serve. For the one who is first to be a slave, for anyone who is to be called great or a leader, as a Christian, for them to be a servant, must have just shocked them. They were all still under this first century mindset of the Jews that when the Messiah came, he was going to take over, free them from the Roman rule, and defeat Rome. From there, they would conquer the world with the Messiah as their leader, and those who were his enemy would bow the knee to him. But that's not what Jesus was talking about. So when Jesus tells them that they need to be servants to be considered great in the kingdom, they need to be slave of all. This must have just really shocked them, as many things Jesus had taught them did. But these words, it's interesting that the theme of this goes, we see it all the way back to James and John talking about leadership. They want to be rulers with Christ. And Christ gives a correct definition of leadership for the Christian. So I believe the theme of this section is the difference between worldly leadership and Christian leadership. So these words, servant, that Jesus uses here, the word is diakonos, and this word in the Greek is maybe even stronger than servant, what we would think of as servant. This goes to more like a table waiter, maybe one who does menial task, just small things, not a servant who is over the house, or the servant who is the one who is commended for being the best because he does the greatest helpful things. No, this is one who does the small things, the things that need to be done. But who are they doing this for? Anyone who needs it. That's what Jesus is telling them. The one who is going to be great in the kingdom is the one who does these little things for people around them who need it. He also uses the term slave of all. This Greek word is doulos, and it means slave, bondservant. It's interesting to think about this as a slave to God who serves everyone around him to bring glory and honor to him. I believe this is how this is pointing. So we become a slave of all. We do things for everybody, anybody around who needs help. And this word, to think about the contrast between James and John's question. They want to rule. They're the sons of thunder. They're ruling with Jesus. To them being slave, to do what needs to be done. Also, this word kind of shows a drastic change in position. For a Christian leader, they're not to be of high status. Not walk around saying, well, I'm above you, as the Greeks do. As the Romans do. Jesus points to this. He talks about the way the Gentiles lead. They rule. And he talks about, they do it. We are the leaders. We are the ones. You serve us. But that's not how it is for the Christian. And the Christian leader, it is to say, how can I serve you? What can I do to help you? So all of this together, wow, what a contrast. Makes an interesting thought for the disciples, what they must have been thinking at this point. They had to be so much information for them to try to process through. They had always thought that the Messiah would come back and take over. But that's not what the Messiah is telling them. He's telling them that they must serve all. And he gives the example of himself. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And he serves as being a ransom. What an ultimate service. And to think about this correctly, this ransom that he's speaking of is probably a reference to Isaiah 53, verse 11, right around that area. And so he's paying this ransom, but he's doing it with his life for, at the time, his enemy. Sinners. Each one of us. Scripture says we're at enmity with God. And yet that's who Jesus is doing this for. So in that way we can see that this Christian leadership is totally different. We're not being servant or a slave to all for those that we like or for those who are kind to us, but for anyone, to show the glory of God to them. And so, as we move from actually understanding what this meant to the disciples to an application of today, here in the 21st century, I think that all Christians, especially leaders, are to serve others by doing whatever we see needs done for them. Our church recently located a widow not far from our church. She does not attend our church, but they had found out that she was going through chemotherapy and couldn't walk up the stairs to her house anymore. So the church volunteered to go out and build a wheelchair ramp. And one Saturday afternoon, a few adults and some of the youth went out for no other reason than just to serve this lady and show her Christ. Now, while we were there, we found out that she was a Christian, and we were able to pray with her. But we didn't know that at first. And so I think that is a great example also to go maybe next door. Maybe an older couple, maybe a young couple struggling, maybe a single mom. Needs her grass cut, needs anything done, anything around the house. Maybe you see some people who live in your neighborhood and you know both parents work and they have children, and it's really a struggle for them just to spend time together, rushing home, cooking dinner. Maybe prepare dinner for them one night. But serve them to show them who you serve, who we serve. So I think that's a wonderful application of this. This points right to the Christian leader directly, but also to all Christians, I think, are to be serving however they can. And Christ has given us this command, and he has given this example to his disciples, which we today as Christians can apply to our lives as well. So remember that to be great in the kingdom of heaven is to be a servant, to be a slave of all. And so thank you for your time. I hope you have a good evening.